This is Folks Unfettered. I'm Evan Grollman. I am the host of the Blue Dog Whisperer podcast. I'm filling in for my very good friend Gene this week. He'll be back soon, of course. But I wanted to talk a little about what's been going on recently regarding our society, not just here in the United States, but around the world. And what I mean by that is there is a significant lack of civility that not long ago we had. So Lindsey Graham, the longtime Republican U.S. Senator from South Carolina, died unexpectedly. Now, I know people who work in politics, and they had seen photos and I think maybe even videos of Lindsey Graham recently, and he did not look good at all. And there are some conspiracy theories surrounding his death, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But because of the very contemptuous nature of politics and the fact that everything has become so inflammatory and we are riding on sensationalism. Now, I've seen Gene post to his Facebook page that that Donald Trump is currently our president because America is like this. And I do think that we are the greatest country in the world. I absolutely do. But I think for a long time, we have relied heavily on sensationalism, in large part because of the reality TV era. And as you all know, President Trump played a very unique role in that long before he was President Trump. The Apprentice was a very successful reality show. I watched it a lot. That's actually why I first met Gene. I mean, I was very impressed when Gene was on the show. And years later, I had reached out to him to appear on my podcast to discuss what he experienced with Donald Trump as a person, as a boss. And I was not surprised by what Gene said regarding his experiences. But Gene also has a very good point in that America is very sensationalized. We have someone from WWE who is currently representing the Department of Education, Linda McMahon. Now, anyone who paid a little bit of attention to wrestling, and I certainly don't, but I know that it's fake. Much like a lot of reality TV is completely doctored and fake and altered and all that. But the fact that someone like that is representing the Department of Education on behalf of an administration who is led by a reality TV star, I think is very fitting. There are some picks in the Trump administration who are qualified. This is one of them. But the fact that education, which is designed to shape the future of our country, is being led by a woman whose biggest claim to fame was helping to run WWE, that's telling. But I want to get back to Lindsey Graham for a second because there is a lot of sensationalism in the United States, and with that includes very strong emotions and feelings, not just being felt, but being expressed when we learn about the death of someone. Both sides of the political spectrum do it. There are people in the sensible center who do it. But after Lindsey Graham died, I saw a lot of really, really disgusting remarks surrounding his life story, his career in politics. And full disclosure, I never cared for Lindsey Graham. As a registered voter, I'm not from South Carolina. I've never even been to South Carolina. But I can say that for people like me, with his politics, I'm not talking about Lindsey Graham as a person, but with his politics, Lindsey Graham probably did more to people like me than for people like me. He was not a friend of the middle class and the working poor, but that's beside the point. I'm only telling you this because I do think that there is a difference between not agreeing with someone's politics and being completely distasteful in your response to their death. Because I do think that most people throughout the world have some good qualities in them. And Lindsey Graham certainly was one of them. He served his country, he served our country in the military. He legally adopted his sister when she was 13, after their parents died. And he had a good friendship with John McCain, and he just struck me as the kind of person who, if one of his friends, family members, or even a random stranger were having a problem and he saw what was going on, he would be right there. I have always said that there are people whom you will never agree with, or you will rarely agree with politically. But if you're friends with them or you're related to them and you're having a problem, they would be first in line to help. Whereas sometimes people who you may be in lockstep with, ideologically speaking, they wouldn't give you the time of day. I don't think politics necessarily plays a role in how good of a person is on a personal level. Now, granted, Lindsey Graham, he was a political figure. Most of us did not know him personally. So I feel that. I really do. But what I would say is that how someone responds to the death of an individual within the first 24 hours, I think, says a lot, not just about the feelings that were inspired by that particular individual when they were alive, but I also think it says a lot about the person who is making the comments, whether they're good or bad, as well as the state of our environment. I have no doubt that if Lindsey Graham had died during the Bush administration or the Obama administration, that the feedback from people who probably wouldn't have voted for him if they lived in South Carolina, or people who did not vote for him in South Carolina, would be a little different. And there are two reasons for that. Number one is the fact that the president, and I'm not blaming him entirely for this, but Donald Trump's time in office, both his first term and his second term, we have seen that increase of sensationalism where people essentially have very little filter. And what I think is fascinating is that one of the many complaints or even endorsements of President Trump during his first campaign for president was he speaks his mind. He says what we're all thinking. Now, I don't think that he says what we're all thinking, but Trump was unfiltered. But a lot of people who didn't like him said that he's not diplomatic. He doesn't think before he speaks. He just says whatever he's thinking at the moment. And because he was elected president, I think that it kind of normalized the idea of just say what you're thinking, regardless of whether it is received well. Even by his most adamant, ardent political opponents, both on the public stage, on the world stage, and also just Main Street. It's as if we have allowed this paranoid, or what appears to be a paranoid conspiracy theorist like Donald Trump, and let's be honest, the system has never targeted the Trumps of the United States. But Donald Trump, for whatever reason, I don't know, has acted as though the system has always been out to get him. Now, he was found criminally guilty for 34 counts in New York. And I actually think that one of the reasons why he might have actually, I'll tell you right now, I have a lot of politically involved friends, much like myself, who said after the convictions that Donald Trump was done after he was found guilty. Like, there's no way he's coming back from this. And I said online, on Twitter, on Facebook, I'm not so sure about that, because in the United States, we incarcerate more people than any other nation on earth. Most people in the United States are only 1, 2, 3 degrees of separation away from someone who is currently locked up. And I think that a lot of individuals saw Donald Trump and actually saw a loved one in Donald Trump. Now, whether you think the justice system is fair or not is one thing. But I think that for good reason that some of us have become completely desensitized to the idea of a felon running the country. Now, I am not someone who generally has a lot of sympathy for criminals, but I will say that I sometimes do believe and second chances. Not everyone is beyond rehabilitation, but the fact that we have become desensitized to so many aspects of Donald Trump, whether you like him or not, the people who loved Donald Trump were going to forgive him for anything he did. I don't think he lost a lot of support, if any, after he was found guilty. But the people who related to Donald Trump, and actually some of the people who related to Bernie Sanders, because I remember when I was in New Hampshire in 2016 canvassing and campaigning for another candidate running for president, it was actually January, it was right before the primary in New Hampshire, a woman said to me and my partner who I was canvassing with, my two choices are Trump and Sanders. And at first it didn't make a lot of sense to me. I was almost 19 years old. I was a few weeks away from turning 19. I was still politically not as astute as I am now. And also, we were still learning a lot about this new era of politics. But as time had gone on, I had realized that there is a level of distrust in the system that's been brewing under the surface for decades. It happened during Obama. It certainly happened under Bush, Clinton, Bush Sr., Reagan. And I don't think that Donald Trump had any reason to really fear the system, being the rich boy from Queens that he is. But being the con man that he is, Donald Trump played into the fears that people have regarding how the system works. And like the chameleon that he has always been, he played into people's fears beautifully, to the point where incrementally, little by little, we have had people who already did not trust the system allow their neighbors who initially did trust the system to become increasingly skeptical of whether the system was working for them. Even under Biden, there were some people who they voted for Biden, they thought he was an improvement over Donald Trump, but they never fully regained their trust in our government. And to be honest, I'm not so sure that there was ever a good reason to completely trust the government. I think that a lot of people who, like Bernie supporters, they don't trust the government for a lot of reasons. And some of them are legitimate, and some of them are because the government has been bankrolled by billionaires like Donald Trump. But I think the main difference between Donald Trump's message and Bernie Sanders' message was, Bernie's message was, we don't trust the government as is because of the private sector. Whereas Donald Trump's message was, we just don't trust government, period. We need the private sector in the public sector. And I don't believe for a second that Donald Trump has any sincere political beliefs. I think that he will take whatever position he can take that will advance himself, advance his career, give him more money in his wallet. And I remember the first time I had Gene on my podcast, The Blue Dog Whisperer, I asked him, do you think President Trump has any political beliefs that he is truly, truly sincere about? And without missing a beat, Gene said, no, I don't. But Bernie and Trump were two sides of the same coin. But my philosophy, or my personal belief, is that when I hear people now talking about how people are losing health insurance, in large part because Donald Trump and the Republicans passed a big, beautiful bill, the cuts to Medicaid were completely wrong, and they definitely need to be reversed. There was a time where I supported single-payer healthcare, and I'm not opposed to that concept. But part of me really wants to ask people, because I'm one of them, would you really trust the government to completely run our healthcare system, knowing how they operate right now, knowing what we know now about how they operate in the past? Do you really want someone like Donald Trump in charge of your healthcare? Would you want someone like Bernie Sanders in charge of your healthcare? I think that, and I am not an anti-establishment person. I never voted for Donald Trump. I never voted for Bernie Sanders. But I'm bringing this up because being as politically involved as I have been and reading up on the issues, I am not immune from becoming more and more skeptical and not trusting of the government, because we have someone at the top, also enabled by a lot of parts of our system that we really didn't keep in check. And it's allowed this to trickle down to people like me who have never been anti-establishment. I am not anti-establishment, but there is a case to be made that government having too much power is a terrible, terrible thing. I've always believed it. I've always believed that you do not want the only people in the United States who are allowed to have a gun to be people in government. I support what some people would say gun control. But the Second Amendment is very important. I honestly believe that if there was ever a case to be made for government overstepping, or for preventing government from overstepping, it's not only some of the decisions that have been made during this administration, especially with Doge, because Doge was sold to us as this this check on government. It wasn't. The fact that we were able to have this billionaire president and who was able to escort some of his lackeys who had no government clearance to access our social security numbers via Elon Musk is shocking and shameful. But at the same time, the COVID lockdown. Listen, there was a pandemic, it was real, the vaccine worked, but there were some moments during the lockdown where I thought we have to be really, really careful about giving government too much power. And it wasn't because of who was in charge. It had nothing to do with Donald Trump. And I'll give you a perfect example. When New York State was operating the way it was during the lockdown, Governor Cuomo at the time, I believe, would not allow gun stores, firearm shops, to be open as an essential business. And the NRA, who I don't agree with often, actually sued. And I said, good for them. Because the fact that a government can tell Main Street which businesses can stay open, especially when one of those businesses provides a service or a good that is explicitly mentioned in our Constitution, is a backdoor way for a governor, a state governor, to infringe on the Second Amendment rights of his citizens. And while it was important to maintain social distancing, the fact that we were able to really fall in line with very little questioning toward the government, and when someone even pointed out publicly that maybe this is an overstep, or maybe this is overreach, or maybe this is too far, there was so much shaming on social media. You were not allowed to question. And I think that if anyone is being honest with themselves, that they would agree that maybe they fell into that trap a little bit too. I know I did at times. But Benjamin Franklin famously said that those who are willing to give up their liberty for safety deserve neither, or something like that. I can't remember the exact line. And what I think is fascinating is that this sensationalism and this distrust of government has been underneath the surface for a long time. And we swept it under the rug. Now, we have a significant portion of democratic socialists who are really just communists, in my view. I know what the technical definition of democratic socialism is, because we already have that, okay? We have Medicaid, we have Medicare, we have police on the streets, firefighters. But guess what? You can't have those services if people don't work, make money, and pay taxes. There is no such thing as government money. There is only the people's money. But I think that it is interesting how, the democratic socialists, by their own admission, they want to basically tear the system down, Western civilization, et cetera, et cetera. And this long precedes the pandemic. But the sensationalism of our governments I believe has created an environment where people like me see how dysfunctional the US Senate can be in front of a camera. Because let's be honest, a lot of this is a performance. Those senators, some of them get along really well, despite the fact that their voting records cannot be more opposites. Everyone talks about how they long for the good old days when Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill could get a beer and all that. I think it's still there. I actually do think it's still there. But with channels like C-SPAN and with the repeal of the Fairness Doctrine, where we have cable news channels, I call them indoctrination packages, where senators will literally do anything they can to get another $5 into their campaign coffer. It's unbelievable. The reason why they do this is so that they can make money. There are a lot of people in Washington who simply do not get along, but a lot of it is also performance. Some of the people you see on the news in Washington, I don't care if you're a Democrat, Republican, who you think that person is an ass, they could literally be the nicest person you've ever met and you would never know it unless you met them yourself. But because we have allowed a reality star to take over as president, and let's be honest, we had a thirst for this. We love reality TV. I love The Apprentice. I love Celebrity Apprentice. It's created an environment where the media, who loves Donald Trump, they pretend that they don't like him and they don't like his politics and his candid nature or what comes off as candid, but they love it because it's great for ratings. But the distrust that we have, I believe in large part, is because we've been fooled by what we perceive as dysfunction in Washington. We think if they can't get along, why should we trust them with our future? And not only that, but the Supreme Court has basically handed the keys to people who really don't understand our struggles, and via the current president as well, because 1/3 of the Supreme Court has been appointed by President Trump. So when you have factors like a Supreme Court that essentially more often than not sides with the haves versus the have-nots, and then you have someone who is good at putting on a performance, and then you have senators who follow, it has allowed this incremental trickle of distrust in government to actually really spread like kudzu. And I don't think there's any aspect of the political spectrum that does not have some distrust of government. And that's not a bad thing. I don't think that's a bad thing. But I think that the fact that we have people who have less trust in government than they did 10 years ago is good, but it's also not, because that's often a sign of a society that's collapsing. We see more rage, we see more anger, we see more vitriol, we see more online fights, we see more physical fights online. All those videos, all that we see online of people punching others in a drive-through line or at a baseball game, I mean, this is all connected. And it's not just political, it really isn't. You could literally abolish politics from the world, and people's anger would still be there. Your rage has to go somewhere. You can punch a locker, you can punch a wall, you can punch a punching bag. Anger, in my view, is like urine. You go into the bathroom, you do your business, you pee, but it's got to go somewhere. That's anger. Anger is in all of us. And some people are more susceptible to it than others. But because of that, I think that Lindsey Graham and his passing, you have a lot of mixed reactions. You have people who are being very candid and not holding back online. You have people who are being a little more gracious. And you also have people who are lashing out, not at Lindsey Graham and whatever he stood for when he was in office, but if someone does something that is not deemed appropriate by conventional standards, and I mean speaking ill of the dead just hours after they are gone. And I'm going to be honest, I'm not a believer in that. I think you should wait at least 24 hours. I'm not even joking. I think that there is a grace period where you should hold back a little bit. But I'll be honest, I've gone off on a few people who, after I had said something complimentary about Lindsey Graham, not about his politics, but about Lindsey Graham, you had people who I just went off on, because I'm not immune from anger. I think that there is some level of decency that we've been in short supply for a while, and we have allowed the status quo to basically poison us. And that's how you get people like me and like everyone. And because of that distrust, we have people who are also, and AI, artificial intelligence, don't get me started on that. Mitch McConnell, no transparency when it came to what was going on. And there was a picture of him in a hospital room looking very frail with his wife. And now we have people who are questioning that. We have people who question whether Trump was assassinated. Everything. Now everyone is asking whether Trump was really in danger, whether Mitch McConnell's alive, whether Lindsey Graham was poisoned by the Russians or the Iranians. It's good to question, but there's a level between, there is a fine line between healthy skepticism and complete and total paranoia. And remember when President Obama, maybe about 6 months before Donald Trump was elected, said that Donald Trump was not the cause of this, he was the symptom. President Obama was right. That said, when you allow a high-profile symptom of this distrust, this dissatisfaction, this skepticism to become president, you are opening the door for that to really, really take effect with people throughout the country from sea to shining sea.